reading Charlie book from Amazon UK. Hope you enjoy it. Please sub me if you like it. Chapter 79, Charlie's Home. There was only one place to go, and there was only one place where he belonged, and that was Charlie and Mary's home. Mary made sure to let the authorities know that it was her intention to look after him, and they agreed. Eventually, Tinker looked round the room and he realized that he didn't recognize any of the posters. The alarm clock had changed and the blinds had now been changed to heavy black curtains. And then it all came back to him like a rushing wave. Tears pricked at his eyes, but this time he didn't let them fall, but he fell back onto his too comfy pillow and he tried his best to fall asleep. Unfortunately, the sound of an annoying saw was scaring the birds and ruining Tinker's peace and quiet. He had no choice but to get out of bed. As he stepped down the stairs, he could hear the tinkle and the clatter of cutlery. He wasn't the only one who was awake. Tinker sat at the table feeling nervous. He wasn't used to such politeness and nice smiling faces. He was more used to threats and a stormy atmosphere. The kettle whistled like an old train and Tinker jumped in his seat. He was a bag of nerves. Mary put her hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry," she said. "It's different here," she added. Tinker began to relax and his mood lightened, but only temporarily. His stomach rumbled and he realized that he was famished, and it didn't take him long to demolish the toast and jam which had once towered in front of him, but now was just a plate of crumbs. Mary kept her eye on him and she was pleased that he was eating again. That was a good sign, she thought, as he looked understandably pale and needed some colour in his cheeks. She kept the conversation going as she knew that the funeral was only a day away, and she was worried how Tinker was going to cope. It was a big thing for a boy to cope with, no matter how unpleasant the dad, she reasoned. Charlie ate his cereal, and he wondered how they were going to get through the day. He knew it was his job to keep Charlie occupied so that he didn't become upset about the looming funeral. I got the names muddled up. Then an idea came to him like the flashing of a torch. They should visit Bob, especially now that he was in their good books. He will definitely keep them amused, thought Charlie, pleased with himself. He quickly scooped up the rest of his cereal and then pushed back his chair. "We're going to see Bob," he said triumphantly. Tinker was surprised, but he knew that he had no choice but to go along with it. The last thing he wanted to do was to rock the boat. Luckily for them, it wasn't raining, and it was a perfect dry, crisp day for walking in the woods. Chapter 80, Bob's Caravan. Hello, viewers. The ground was dry, and it was lovely not to be covered in mud, thought Charlie, as unlike most boys, he hated being muddy. Tinker was still quiet, but at least he had regained a little spring in his step. Charlie hoped that Bob would bring him out of his shell and make him smile, even for a moment. The woods looked so different in the morning, and everything looked so fresh and beautiful, as if it had been varnished by a skilled worker. "Look out," said Tinker, as a squirrel shot quickly up a tree with a tight nut in its paw. "It won't bother us," said Charlie. "It's too busy getting breakfast," he said, smiling, and then they crunched over the fallen twigs and the carpet of leaves. They arrived at the stream, and Charlie was the first to inch his way across the fallen tree. It was slippy, but it was the perfect ladder. When he got to the other side, he waved Tinker over. Tinker was still feeling sleepy, and he was worried about falling in, and when he got to the middle, he began to wobble like a drunken ballerina. He looked down at the rushing water, and he was certain that at any moment he was bound to fall in. Then he heard a familiar voice, and he looked up at Charlie, but there was a figure behind him, and the figure was waving and smiling. Tinker squinted in the sun, and he was sure that he was mistaken, but the image of the figure became clearer, and to his amazement, it appeared to be his dad, a ghostly image. But how could that be possible, he thought. His dad was dead. His dad was waving and smiling and willing him on. Tinker looked at Charlie, but he didn't seem to notice anything, and Tinker kept his eyes on his dad's face, and he walked across the fallen tree without once looking down. He jumped onto the riverbank and then looked up expectantly. His dad wasn't there. There was only Charlie looking and smiling at him. I knew you'd make it, he said. For a moment, Tinker wanted to tell him what he had seen, and then he thought better of it. As they walked along, with only the soothing sound of the birds were supplanted by the loud barking of Bob's two Alsatians. And hearing this, it didn't take long for Bob to open the door of his caravan, resplendent in a stained thermal vest and jogging bottoms splattered with tomato ketchup. Tinker wasn't impressed. At least his dad sometimes wore a suit, he thought snobbishly. Then Bob pulled out two big, greasy-looking sausages from his pockets, and he threw them to the dogs. This quieted them somewhat, and Tinker and Charlie were soon sitting in the caravan, as quiet as two church mice. Hello, viewers. Chapter 81, Bob's Tales, Charlie by Jason William Lee. Bob knew that he had a captive audience, and it'd take him long to begin his tall tales. He didn't know about Tinker's terrible news, but he soon would. I'm sure you're wondering how I came to end up here, he asked them quite loudly. They weren't, but they both nodded in unison. I was a runaway, he said after taking a sip of his very black coffee. I couldn't take any more of my dad's belt, he said, and then one day I grabbed it and turned around and hit him with it for a change. He didn't like it, and when he went looking for something bigger to hit me with, I scarpered, he said with a proud grin. I was 16 and all alone in the big bad world. Was I scared, I hear you ask? Although you don't. Of course I was scared, but I was determined to survive. I ate from bins and I slept in shop doorways or sheds with broken doors. He said shockingly. Charlie was intrigued. What can you eat from bins? He asked in wonder. You'd be surprised, said Bob, scratching his bristly chin. Fish and chips was a favourite, burgers, crisps, biscuits, old vegetables. Just going to turn the page. Hello viewers, please sub me if you like it. Oh my god, it's hard to turn these pages. Oh my god. Oh dear me. Alright, up to page 137. Oh my god. Do you win often, said Charlie, who was impressed. Most of the time, said Bob. How do you think I bought this lovely caravan? He's now talking about his betting. It changed my life, he said wistfully, when I found that old betting book crumpled in a bin in Knightsbridge. It changed my life. I read it every night to keep me company, and it gave me an idea, an escape route. Where's Knightsbridge? Said Charlie, who was engrossed in the story. In London, said Bob, inadvertently scratching his bottom through his tea-stained tracksuit bottoms. Where all the posh people live, and much too posh for me, said Bob, as he lit up a cigarette and filled the caravan with thick grey smoke. Hello, viewers. When the smoke had cleared, Bob could tell that Tinker had become quiet, and he was no longer smiling. In fact, he suddenly looked miserable. Now, Bob may have had a gruff exterior, but what wasn't obvious to anyone was that inside he was as soft as melted butter. Just as he was about to ask him what the matter was, Charlie stepped in and told him the bad news. Bob was dumbfounded, and he didn't know what to say. What a terrible thing for a young boy to go through, he thought sadly, and the prospect of a funeral to cope with made Bob's heart ache for the poor boy. All that I could think of doing was to change the subject. Who would like to go to a race course? Said Bob, smiling with enthusiasm. Charlie said yes, and he looked at Tinker expectantly. Slowly, Tinker raised his head and he nodded slowly, but Bob was pleased to see that he had a smile on his face once again. I'll have to get organized first, said Bob, pulling up his trousers and rummaging through the cupboards and sending papers flying everywhere. I've got some money in here somewhere, he said. Hello, viewers. That's a strange place to put money, said Tinker, who had got his voice back. It's my bank, said Bob. It's as safe as houses and with loads of interest, he said with a wink. Tinker was puzzled. He knew a little bit about banks, and he knew that you couldn't accrue interest from a broken down drawer. That's not possible, said Tinker, quite rudely. Yes, it is, said Bob, as he pulled out a big, sweaty black sock. Here it is, he said, proudly, as he brought it up to his nose and sniffed it at it like it was a sweet-smelling rose, but it wasn't. What does that mean? It was a very sweaty sock, and its cheesy smell soon permeated the room so badly that Bob had to open a window. I get wonderful interest on my savings because I'm interested, said Bob with a grin, and he amazed them both by pulling out of the sock a large bundle of tightly bound notes, a bull's neck. That can't be real money, said Charlie, amazed. Of course it is, said Bob, looking at the huge bundle lovingly. I don't play Monopoly, he joked. The bundle of money was as fat as a wrestler's fist. It's a bull's neck, said Bob, laughing, and he made the shape with his hand. That was how wide and thick it was. There must be loads in there, said Tinker, forgetting his troubles. Wait and see, said Bob, as he untied the elastic band with some difficulty, and he counted out the notes. There were lots of 20s and 10s and a colourful-looking one which they had never seen before. It was a reddish colour, and it looked like foreign money. That's a £50 note, exclaimed Bob, and he ironed it out on the table with care and pride. I've got a few of them, he said. Neither Charlie nor Tinker had ever seen a £50 note before, and they both imagined all of the sweets and crisps and pop that they could buy with it. When Bob had finished, he had lots of piles of money all over the table. It was like being in the home of a brilliant bank robber, thought Charlie. It was a real Aladdin's cave. Thank you, viewers. Please sub me 99